Welcome back to another Indie Fantasy Club book review, where today we're going to be discussing The Lost War by Justin Lee Anderson. Now, this is the first book in his series, and I think he's planning to write 4. I'm pretty sure 2 have already been published. Now, I knew The Lost War was going to be good because it's won a bunch of awards and was actually also picked up by a traditional publisher, Orbit Publishing.
Those track vultures.
But good for him. So just with that context in mind, it's not a finished series if that's something you worry about, especially now that it's moved into the traditional space. Still, as you'll see in my review, I think this one's worth taking the risk to give this one a read. Now, as a quick summary of this book, it basically follows the King's Council's journey, led by Aronach, who is the envoy of the king. In Eden, which is this kingdom, the people are actually very prejudiced against Draoids, which are basically the mages, but the king has a lot of trust in Aronach and uses him as his right hand for everything, especially since Aronach was instrumental in helping the rebellion succeed and now in establishing the new kingdom. So the king tasks his council with finding a banished queen and restoring her to her rightful throne. Now, of course, along the way, they run into all kinds of problems. Plagues, famine, thievery, demons, and just so many more things. It's just constant problems on this road to accomplish this relatively simple task. And it's during this quest that Aronach sees for himself the state of the kingdom. And he really starts to ask himself questions about how it could have gotten to this point that they're at right now. So it really has a very mysterious feel to it as you're reading the book, which is a lot of fun. I'm actually really excited for this review. This was a very interesting premise, and in my opinion, it was masterfully executed. So without further ado, let's dive into this indie review. The world building in this book was done really well, which is why I gave it a 9 out of 10. Now, because Aronach and this King's Council are traveling all over the kingdom, we are basically exposed to a wide range of beliefs, economic dispositions, troubles, and lived experiences of these people. The religion is somewhat vague, I would say, but it's still intriguing and does seem to have that depth that I'm looking for. The magic is interesting and dynamic and folds and integrates well in with the rest of the story. The different towns and cities have their own unique feeling from one another. The people that they interact with, even from side characters to just passerbys, seem deep and authentic and tangible. And these consequences of just a war-ravaged land can be felt anywhere they go, which brings a certain continuity despite all the differences that I mentioned. It also leaves enough questions unanswered that it does leave me wanting more from this world. Like, it felt very complex but contained, if that makes sense. Like, basically we're seeing this like walled off kingdom in a larger world, so it feels very secluded almost. Like the world didn't necessarily feel very vast. It's just like one little neat chunk of the world, but it's still very dynamic in my opinion. So this was just a lot of fun to read from a world building perspective, and I'm definitely excited to see where Justin takes this series, if we get to expand beyond these borders or if we're going to stay in this little kingdom. And of course, we'll just have to hope that he finishes the series, because this is one book that will not leave you satisfied by the end. It will definitely leave you wanting more. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this series ties together. The names get an 8.5, but not for the reasons that you might think. Hi, Ted. It looks like Ted's decided to join us. I honestly felt like the characters were very deep and compelling and complex and just overall very interesting. Guess not. My main issue was just that I felt like there were too many POVs just for this book. I think that other books you can work with that many POVs, but just for what he had written here, I think there was too many. I think they were good, but they weren't necessary, if that makes sense. Like, especially in the beginning, I felt like there was a lot of head hopping going on, and it just made it really hard to get invested into any of the characters and to kind of settle into the story. And that's very much just my preference when it comes to characters. Like, I understand what Justin was doing with this book, and I do think that this style will still work for probably the majority of fantasy readers. It just wasn't my favorite. Like, I think personally we would have been fine with just like 3 POVs, like Aronach, Samali, and maybe Nyria. I didn't really see the value of like Elandria or Glorbad or even Vastin. Keeping them as more like well-developed side characters, I think would have benefited this story more. But if you like to see books with a lot of different POVs and perspectives and personalities, then who knows, maybe this would be a 10 out of 10 for you. Because there aren't a lot of issues with the characters themselves. I do feel like they're good. They have unique and varied motivations and experiences, which brings a level of depth and dynamics to these relationships that makes it very engaging to read. I also like that, for the most part, we're getting perspectives of characters that are all within the same group. So we're not like going across the country to the different characters. We're seeing everything from this one group, just from different angles, which was kind of interesting. Different, but interesting. It's just that Aronach and Samily were the standout performances, in my opinion. I just really loved those characters and just how much they contrasted each other. Nyria I liked as well, but I think we mostly just need her when they start to split and go in different directions. If I had to pick one POV, I would pick hers when they do eventually split off. Again, nothing wrong with these characters other than the fact that I felt like I didn't need to be inside all of their heads. Now, the magic and creatures easily get a 9 out of 10 from me. There was such a unique and diverse magic system for the different types of mages, but there were also really interesting characters and demons sprinkled throughout this story. So let's start off with the magic. The mages are referred to as Draoids, and they have a pretty wide range of abilities, some of which aren't even known. Aronach is an Earth Draoid, which means he has the ability to control all kinds of elements, including fire, earth, water, air, etc., etc. So he's not limited to the earth. He just is called an Earth Draoid and has access to all those different elements, which is really cool to see. There is a cost where accessing the magic drains away their energy, but I don't know that I'd necessarily call it a hard magic system. There's not going into a lot of depth as to how the magic works. We just get to see it in operation, and we kind of have a general understanding of what it's going to cost them. So definitely more on the soft side, just so you're aware. Other types of Draoids would include shapeshifters, necromancers, demon summoners, healers, time benders, illusionists, and more than I'm probably forgetting. There's a bunch. So it is cool to see how these different mages counter each other's strengths and weaknesses. Now, the creatures are basically a result of like demon summoning and necromancy, but I'm just going to count it as its own category as creatures. We basically get to see a bunch of various types of zombie hordes in this book, and I'm here for it. A plague called the Blackening turns people into zombies from just skin-to-skin contact. Actual zombies roam free in destroyed cities, and demons hide in little cocoons in the trees and in the shadows at night, just waiting to attack. So it was a lot of fun to read about all of these dark, manipulated creatures and all of these plagues that were born because of the magic. And I liked that the magic was pretty easy for me to understand, especially considering how well it was integrated into the world. And because the magic had consequences, it wasn't like it could just be used easily to get them out of every situation. So overall, I found it to be very well developed and unique, which is why I gave it such a high score. Now let's talk about the infrastructure for a minute. This had a very interesting style to the writing, where, like I mentioned before, it kind of felt like a lot of head hopping. Like we would actually jump multiple perspectives within the same chapter between the different people that were in the same group together. So that was kind of different, and I could see it being confusing, because usually when you have different POVs, you're like following different people in different parts of the world, and eventually they come together. Nope, not this time. Just different viewpoints on the same situation. So it did take some time for me to get used to that style, but in the end, it did kind of grow on me. With that said, the actual plot of this book might be one of the best, most expertly executed ideas I've read in a fantasy story in a long time. So I'm gonna give it a 9.5 out of 10. It's just one of those books that now that I know the ending of the story, I'm going to have to go back through and read this book again, which maybe I'll do before I read the second one at some point in the future. But at the same time, it's also one of those books that I wish I could forget so I could have that reading experience all over again. So for the plot alone, I can understand why Orbit wanted to pick this one up. It's absolutely incredible. Now, fair warning, it starts out super slow. I was actually getting super frustrated with these characters for like the first half of the book. Like, I was agreeing with Glorbad for most of the story. I was like, dude, just accomplish the assignment you've been freaking given by the king. Stop going on all these stupid little side quests and getting distracted. It was like ADHD had full control of the story, and I just wanted Aronach to complete his assignment, for crying out loud. But like I said, about halfway through, I was like fully entrenched in this story, in the plot, in the character arcs, the tension, the stakes, and the questions. Oh man, it just kept building and building and building to the point where I just could not put the book down. About 2/3 of the way through, I felt like I knew what the ending of the story was going to be, and I was kind of dreading the ending because I felt like I knew what was happening. But even the end threw me for a loop. That's how well it was written. It was both surprising, and yet it made complete sense in hindsight. Now, I can't say too much more on the plot for the sake of spoilers, but just know I think this is well worth the read. But also keep in mind, I'm an idiot. I'm not one of these Sherlock Holmes readers that can pick out the little details and Easter eggs and twists with just a few clues that are dropped and sprinkled in throughout the story. I just kind of frolic through the story and let the questions answer themselves as they come along. So maybe the plot and ending and twists will be obvious to you, but I certainly had a great time with it. So my overall enjoyment experience of the book, I have to give an 8.5. I think I would have had a better experience, like I mentioned, if there were fewer POVs in the beginning of the story. Because even though there was action and intrigue for the first half of the book, it's not like it was slow or boring for lack of action, and those elements were necessary to kind of build the plot towards its conclusion, but it was just felt harder for me to get through that first part of the journey that they were going on. Like, if I had to break the story, I would say that the first half was like a 6.5 out of 10. This is starting to sound repetitive. I seem to struggle with the first halves of stories and love the endings. I'm afraid this also falls into that category. But it just shows you that fantasy stories, you need to give a chance, because a lot of times you will end up loving the book even if you had a hard time getting into it. So I'll just put that disclaimer in there, because the second half of this book, I'm telling you, was just a perfect execution of a fantasy story. So it was like a 10. So I obviously wanted to continue reading the story, but it wasn't until about halfway through that I was glued to the pages. It almost felt like a thriller or mystery book that just happened to take place in a fantasy world. So I know there's like romance in a fantasy world. So is there a word for like thrillers in a fantasy context? Fantasy? Mantasy? I don't know. But that's what it felt like. And since I don't normally read those kinds of books, it was great to get a little taste of that. And again, the ending of this book makes everything worth it, and it does make the beginning make way more sense. This is definitely one of my favorite self-published books that I've read so far, and I'd say that it lives up to all of that hype that it's gotten. Actually, you know what? I haven't even really heard any hype around this book other than like the awards and it getting picked up by a traditional publisher, so I actually think it could use more hype around this story. People need to be talking about this freaking book. It was such a great read. That leaves us with an overall score for The Lost War of an 8.9 out of 10. I couldn't recommend this book highly enough. It was so close to getting a 9 out of 10. So close. I think it has enough different fantasy elements to it that any type of fantasy reader can enjoy this. It has some grimdark elements to it. It has some epic adventures, romance, and obviously some mystery. It really does have it all. So this book was really close, a hair away from getting a cover facing on the shelf, but it just wasn't quite there. But who knows, maybe book 2 will end up being a cover facing story. But as it stands right now, man, that's heartbreaking. I really thought that this one was going to get a 9 from me. So, but still phenomenal story. Highly recommend. So let's get it on the shelf. Just kidding. I forgot we still need to talk about the design. For the design bonus review, I did pick up this copy as one of the Orbit published versions of the book. So I don't know if it's fair to judge this artwork from the book. but we're going to anyway. I really like the cover of this. The balance of simple colors really makes it so these characters stand out and really pop. Again, I also like it when we get a baseline visual of characters. So the cover kind of is like a cheat sheet of what these people actually look like. But yeah, just a really stunning color. I love the green. I love the white and black. I think it looks really good. The only other artwork in the book is the map, which I think is simple, but it's clean and effective. I found myself referring to this map many times throughout the story, so it was nice to have a very well-designed map of this kingdom. So those are my thoughts there. Really well formatted. Obviously, it got picked up by traditional publishing, so everything is structured and looks really professional and clean. But yeah, that's the only artwork for review. When, not if, but when you read The Lost War, please let me know in the comments if I'm just an idiot. Did you see that ending coming? Am I wrong to think this book deserves more hype? I have to know. And I feel like this is one of those books that I'm just going to end up liking more and more as I look back on it and as time passes. So anyway, that's my indie ranking for The Lost War. Be sure to join the club so that you never miss an indie review, and I will see you in the next video.